Hi, Pagan Shooter back. I wanted to touch on something that a lot of new shooters would not understand, and that's bore sighting. Bore sighting is, and for those of you that are knowledgeable about it, you just bypass. I mean, honestly, you probably already know this, but this is more for new shooters. Bore sighting is the act of looking or sighting up the scope with the bore. Let me kind of give you an example. I have the 22, the Marlin Model 60, and with the new scope. I have not gone and shot this yet. I know, bad pagan shooter. But the idea is this scope, when I put it on here, is not going to be it's not going to be on target. And the idea is to aim the scope to where the bore is pointed to, the bore being the barrel. And by the way, this one is completely open. The magazine is not in it, it is empty. So the idea is you want to aim the scope to where the barrel is. Now, for those of you that don't understand, this does not make it accurate. What this does is when you do go to shoot it to aim it in, you are aiming it to, you're at least on paper. So my personal process, I guess you would say, would be to bore sight it to about 25 yards. That's where I would start my shooting when I would go to the range to sight it in. So the act of bore sighting basically just gets you close to where you're going to be shooting. Now, what is the difference between bores or impact and sight? Well, impact is where the bullet is going to hit. So when you're sighting to impact, that is the act of actually sighting in your scope to where the bullet should hit when obviously untouched when you're shooting it at a specific range. So when you're shooting your rifle, the bullet comes out of the barrel and the two are not going to match at certain distances. At 25 yards, when you bore sight, the optic view of it will be the same, but the impact sight may not be because they don't intersect there. Some rifles they do. The act of bore sighting gets you on paper so you can then go to the range and sight it in for that distance. The act of sighting it in, you're basically raising and lowering the crosshairs to your impact point for when you're shooting. Now, the idea is you want to sight to the distance that you want to shoot on average at. So in the case of this, it was sighted originally to about 50 yards, which gives me about 150 yards out. I could usually finagle it to that point. What I plan to do with this larger scope now is I'm going to take it and I'm going to sight it into 50 at the indoor range, and then once it gets nicer out, I'm going to go ahead and sight it into about 150 yards. So I want this rifle to be able to reach out further. What this means is by adjusting it or adjusting the sight in the scope, I could then shoot 100 yards, 50 yards, or even out to 200 yards. After that, my vision isn't going to allow me to do that. So the idea is bore sighting gets you on paper, and then you have to shoot the rifle to actually sight it into to the impact point. So how do you bore sight? Well, the idea is you want to keep this rifle at a level, stationary position, and then you want to, well, they have several different methods. I use a laser bore sight, which is basically a piece that fits down inside the bore here, the barrel, and it shoots a laser out, and wherever that laser hits, that's where the bore is pointed. That's where the barrel is pointed. They have ones that fit down in the chamber. They have ones that clamp around the end of the barrel. They have ones that fit down inside the barrel. I even knew a guy years ago that he was actually really good at it. He could with bolt action rifles, he could pull out the bolt, stare down the barrel. He could do it with AR type rifles as well. Stare down the barrel, see the target where it's at, and then look up through the scope and determine if it's bore sighted in close enough to the bore. And then from there, he was able to hit paper and go from there. He was a lot better at that stuff than I am. There's no way I could do it. However, with the different types, you have your positives and your negatives. With the chamber type, they fit down inside the chamber, and as long as it's a decent manufacturer, it will be very centered to the bore or to the barrel of the rifle, and it will hold very close to where it should be when you're looking down the scope. However, those are normally only 1 or 2 or possibly even 3 calibers. So you have to have many of them to cover your needs for multiple rifles or multiple pistols or even shotguns. If you only have 1 or 2, then that's actually probably best for you. In my case, I've actually got one that slips down inside the barrel, and it actually has a piece that you screw onto the end that will keep it flush or holding centered in the barrel. Now, they're not as accurate as the ones that fit down inside the chamber. However, it allows you to have multiple different ones. There's also other ones that clamp onto the front of the barrel that don't slide down inside. Now, these are probably a little better for the crown of your barrel. However, they're probably not as accurate because they're clamping onto the outside of it, and that actually will make you lose a little bit of accuracy with that. I prefer the type that insert down the barrel because I feel that they're a little more accurate than the type that clamp on, and it gives me a little more ability to do multiple calibers with one bore sight as opposed to multiples. Now, I did have one for my 300 Win Mag that was a chamber one, and it was very accurate. The problem was it was a very inexpensive one, the batteries died very quickly, and it was only for the 300 Win Mag. So it was one of those things where I needed one, so I bought it, but I kind of regretted getting that specific one after the fact. So when you do decide you need one, your best to look at it in the fashion is, if you are going to get one, you should look at it to, am I going to need a different one? Do I have other calibers that I'm going to need to sight in eventually? And these can be used with not just your scopes. They can be used with hard sights. They can be used with reflective red dots. They can be used with a multitude of different sights. It just helps you get an idea of where the bore is pointed. So when you do go to shoot and sight in the rifle, it will be accurate enough to where you can get on paper and then sight it in much more clean, much more precisely after you've shot it a few times. There's a whole lot more to the sighting in process that you really kind of have to learn by doing, but that's the basics of bore sighting. So I have a couple of questions for you guys. When you switch out your scopes, do you have somebody else bore sight it for you, or do you do it yourself? Do you buy from, say, someplace like Gander Outdoors and have them do it for you? Because I know a lot of these places will actually bore sight your rifles for you. If you're going hunting, do you actually go and just go to the range and shoot, or do you bore sight your rifle in? What advantages have you had from doing these? Give me some feedback on this. Let me know what you think. Go ahead and check out my website at paganshooter.com. Go ahead and follow me on Instagram at paganshooter. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let me know what you think about the subject, if you've actually done any of this stuff yourself. If you're a new shooter, let me know what you would like to know about. If there's anything that maybe some of the other subscribers or some of the other people that watch the channel, maybe they can help as well. But this is Pagan Shooter, and I'll see you next time.